So welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We actually were supposed to be in a smaller room, which is a little bit more intimate, and we were going to be in a circle, which is a little more intimate, but we had some tech issues. So we ended up in this room, which has its perks, but the whole rows, it's a little hard. So in any case, I don't know, after maybe we see the slides, we may decide to change it if we're going to actually like chat for a few minutes in a group. But since we are a smaller group, I'd love to just introduce ourselves before I show you some slides. And I would just love to hear from you. Anything you want to share personally about Standing Rock. I know Nettie's been there, and others of you may have a connection that I'd love to hear about. And then I'll show you some photos. But to introduce myself, I'm Abby MNOOKIN, and I went to Standing Rock as an individual without my family, but in a larger group that I'll talk more about. But I also organize with 350 Vermont, and I organize parents and families doing climate action work. And I did consider bringing one of my daughters, who's 4.5, but I did not bring her. But there were many families there. And I'm also part of the 350 Brattleboro, which is newly emerging, and it's sort of like, it's called a node, but it's just a smaller group of 350 Vermont that's focused here in Brattleboro. And so we hope to see more of you at more gatherings like that. And I was at Standing Rock the last week of November, which is Thanksgiving week, often it's called. But yeah, I'd love to hear, we can just go around and your name and any connection you have to Standing Rock or anything else you want to share
I'm Daniel Quipp. I also organize with 350 Brattleboro, and I organized the September rally we had in support of the Standing Rock suit.
My name is Sarah, and I have no direct connection to New York, but I'm just very interested in hearing more about it.
Hi, my name is Samuel. I am from Mexico, from an indigenous community in the Zapotec Valley, and I'm just interested in what's happening here and how it relates to what we go through as well.
And I'm Pam, and I have no direct connection either, but I appreciate all the work that you folks do, and whatever I can do to plug in and be a voice.
Hi, I'm Nettie, and I was at Standing Rock the same time Abby was. I stayed a little bit longer, but yeah.
Hi, I'm Kim. I may come into some of the direct actions for 350. I'm also a part of Lost River Racial Justice. This is Sabrina, and this is Fiona.
My name's Jethro, and it's hard to ignore what's going on, so it's nice to be part of it and learn more about it. And, I mean, it's crazy because I've been, since this is going on, I've been researching just like the history of like the Dakota and like what they've already been through, just like with like the Civil War and everything. It's just crazy that we're just trying to brush this aside.
I'm Daniel Seekin. I'm part of the weekly TD Bank Vigil here in Brattleboro on Fridays from noon to 1. Also the 99th Monkey Affinity Group that was formed to oppose the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which has since been canceled for now.
I'm Lori Schreier, and I've been following intensely on Facebook all the postings, and ever since Regina Randall was here a couple months ago during the fundraiser, and she had been there and she spoke a lot about Standing Rock. So since then I've been linked with her and with you and all different posts and watching the videos and just really getting drawn into it from that angle. So and sharing a lot of those posts, donating money and just trying to, you know, pray that this works out the right way. And I did hear some other good news that I'm wondering if you heard as well. I don't know if I should share it now, but about flooding the area that the Army Corps was going to do, open up a dam so that it would be flooded to the point where they couldn't drill under that water, that reservoir that they wanted to drill under. And that was a video that was on about a week ago.
The Young Turks.
No, it
Talk a
was,
little bit about that.
I don't know who who presented it and if that's really happening. It's so hard to know what's true, but they seemed like they were legitimate people, and they were also talking about the court case, which is going to go into February, so that it would delay a lot of, you know, anything maybe from happening till then anyway.
My name is Dave Cohen, and I've been following it pretty closely. I was writing letters every day to the president, to anybody can, you know, write to this, and you know, donated money. Really interested in it from the perspective, many perspectives, of course, for native rights and so forth. But the fact that the notion of the sacred was brought up, and it got into the media, is so interesting. It's so not congruent with our culture that something can be sacred, or you know, that land or water or, you know, the earth is sacred. I thought that was just, it's something I've been waiting for a long time. Yeah.
Hello, I'm George Harvey, and I write for Green Energy Times on energy and climate change. I have a TV show on VCTV called Energy Week, which shows up every week on Channel 10. Which is also energy and climate change. I have a blog that the Energy Week news is based on, which is posted every day at geoharvey.com, Geoharvey. And one thing I'd like to mention about Standing Rock is that we don't need that gas. We've got better ways to do what we're doing, and as a matter of fact, one of the things that came up in the news twice in the last week from two different sources is that the price of solar power in the United States has fallen below, the price of electricity from solar power has fallen below the price of everything else. It is now the cheapest source of electricity we've got. Second cheapest is wind.
I'm Sarah. I'm from Washington State, and I've been following what's going on at Standing Rock since probably early summer, and I've had a lot of friends go out there, but I'm a graduate student and up at SIT, and I'm the co-coordinator of their Green Up group that's also taken a particular interest in this particular initiative and some of the other pipelines kind of around the world. And so we're trying to work locally with 350 and kind of organize more events around that. We had a faculty from Marble come and talk at our school last week, and we're organizing some other small fundraisers. But just happy to be out in the community and seeing who else is also interested in this topic.
But I do want to point out in this week's Commons, there's a really beautiful piece in the Voices section from two other Vermont, or people from Vermont who traveled to Standing Rock at the same time, Anna Mullen and Alana Fishman. And they wrote this piece, and there are a couple photographs as well. And it's called Not Our Land, Not Our Story. And it's a really beautiful piece. If you didn't read it, I recommend it. And I think it really highlights how, like, it's weird for me to be up here and, like, talk about Standing Rock. And so I just want to acknowledge that from the beginning and really, like, try as much as I can to present this really as just my experience in this week traveling to Standing Rock. It's not supposed to be like a representative story of this whole struggle, and I am not Indigenous, and I really don't want to represent Indigenous voices. So I think that's important to say from the beginning, and they do a really nice job of speaking to that. Yeah, so it is an Indigenous-led movement, and I'm going to get back to that for sure. That's like a really central piece of this whole movement, and I think part of the real power of it. But just to rewind a little bit, I wanted to show a couple slides just to give a broad picture of the Dakota Access Pipeline, just where it is, what we're talking about, in case people wanted to place it on a map, literally. So this is, obviously there's not a lot of detail on this map. I'm going to show one other one. But this is a proposed pipeline that would travel through 4 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Illinois. But I think another important thing to mention is that most of this pipeline is already built. And that's a really different struggle than the Keystone pipeline, for example, which wasn't approved and didn't get its approval to begin construction. But in this case, over 1,000 miles of this pipeline have already been built. So that's a really hard thing for me to swallow as an environmental and climate activist. But it also highlights how this final piece in North Dakota that needs a permit is on sacred indigenous land that really is Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota tribal nation land, and there's a treaty that was broken, and the Army Corps took it over in the mid to late 1800s, and so this struggle is for that piece of the pipeline. And there are also a couple other struggles happening for small pieces as well in Iowa. But the majority of this pipeline has been built, and that needs to be acknowledged. That said, maybe it won't be utilized. There are a lot of reasons why it doesn't need to be. The black snake is another thing that I'll come back to. I don't know if people are familiar with that term at all, the black snake, but there are several prophecies that are really central to the Lakota people, and a variety of other indigenous tribes have overlapping prophecies. But the black snake is a prophecy, and I couldn't really find details about like the specifics. It was a little bit vague, but basically there is a prophecy that this black snake would come and wreak destruction on the environment and cause a lot of pain and destruction. And there is a belief that this black snake is sort of manifesting as the Dakota Access Pipeline. And please feel free to chime in if you know more or understand it differently. But there is lots of images of the black snake all around Standing Rock, and on this map. The pipeline itself is representing the black snake. So there's the proposed pipeline. There's like the original route, which is on the top, that goes closer to Bismarck, and then below is where the darker line is where it's proposed now. And so the original route was defeated by primarily the white population of Bismarck, who said that it was going to be too close to their drinking water supply and it would endanger their drinking water. And so it was defeated by this primarily white community outside of Bismarck. And it was rerouted on this sacred tribal land that has been taken by the Army Corps. But obviously the whole stand at Standing Rock was not foreseen at that point. It was just like, oh, well, the native people probably it won't matter if we just put the pipeline here.
Was that just this year that the Bismarck decision was made to move it? It was just in 2016 that happened?
Yeah. But I actually don't know when the pipeline first began in terms of the construction of it. That would be, I don't know if anyone does know, because it's a long process. And so this map also points out a couple of the sacred sites, some of which have already been destroyed, and those are highlighted on this map. I have this, obviously you really can't see this in a slide, but I do have this, and I could pass it around. It was reprinted in the Commons, and I think it does a really good job of putting a lot of this in context. So it points out a lot of the places that we've heard about and highlights what's happened along the way and when. And so this is the section of the pipeline that goes under the Missouri River and Lake Oahe, which is unbuilt. And that is what the stand at Standing Rock is fighting against. So that portion. So it just, if you want to look at that map, it will point out different events that have happened. This slide doesn't particularly explicitly relate to the Dakota Access Pipeline, but it was a graphic that I couldn't resist sharing if you didn't also see it on Facebook. And one of the things that I heard again and again and again while I was at Standing Rock, but also I'm also in a lot of Facebook groups like Lori had mentioned that are supporting Standing Rock and hearing stories from the ground. And what keeps being reiterated is this is not a question of if this pipeline fails, it would contaminate millions of people's drinking water, but when. Because pipelines fail, and the rate at which they fail is really astounding. And the length of time that they're like guaranteed for is really short. So some of them fail in 1 year, some of them fail in 10, some in 30, some in 50, but it's almost inevitable that something will fail, and then it's really hard to clean up. So.
And there was a failure just like, like 100 miles away, north pipeline just recently.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding me. I meant to include that slide and I didn't. There's very close to Standing Rock, there's been a really big oil spill from a nearby pipeline. And so it's brought a lot of attention, although probably not enough attention, to what people are concerned about and how likely it could be. So here we are getting ready to leave on our bus. So I was, like many of you, I'd been reading about Standing Rock for months. This began, this really began as an encampment, a peaceful resistance encampment in April of this year. So it's already been going on for 8 months. And so 7 months when I traveled. So I'd been hearing about it for many, many months, reading about it, knew some people who had traveled there, was also, doing what I could from home to support it with petitions and letters and donating money, but just felt this call to go, and was lucky enough to have a supportive partner who was willing to stay home with our 2 young daughters for a week. And 350 Vermont helped to organize a bus that was subsidized by Ben & Jerry's, which made it was helpful that they paid for half of our bus, which was great, and it seemed like all the pieces were falling into place to get me there. So it made the trip possible, and we had a variety of people traveling, including college students from Hampshire and Sterling and UVM, and people who were also leaving their families and working jobs and not going to be with their families over Thanksgiving, but all of us for similar, overlapping reasons just called to go. And oftentimes I heard they're thanking us for responding to this call of our hearts, that it was just, this call had been put out and we had responded, and there was a lot of gratitude for that. It was a long trip. We slept in the bus, so all of the little dots are just places we stopped and used the bathroom and got some food, but basically we just left Vermont and then on Saturday morning and arrived at Ochetti Shakowin Camp on Sunday afternoon. So I actually appreciated the bus ride because it was like a long transition to camp, because it was really different being there than my life here in Brattleboro. So I appreciated those many hours on the bus. This is not my picture. This is from an online news source. In terms of taking pictures at Standing Rock, you're supposed to have a media pass for almost all the pictures you take. I actually was able to get a media pass for my work with Vermont Public Radio, but there's still a lot of restrictions about what you take pictures of. You never take pictures of ceremonies or prayers or sacred objects, horses, especially if the horses are not with their riders, are considered sacred and can be traced back, their legacy can be traced back to like several generations. I don't know how many, several is too few. So, and even taking pictures of people, you're always supposed to get permission of the people that you take pictures of, and you're asked to really think about what's the purpose of this picture. Is it so that you can go home and like gain notoriety in some way for this picture, or is it to center and presence the people in it? And so trying to just sort of unpack your own motives. And so you'll notice that I just have fewer pictures of people. I felt like that wasn't really the point of my travels there. And I did want to bring these stories home, but it just felt, yeah, it changed things just hearing that explanation. So, and I don't have that many pictures of Indigenous people because it also felt really different to be like, can I take your picture and then come home and share it? So that said, Indigenous people are really at the center of this. And so I want to center their voices without you seeing as many photos. So this, I think, is a good representation of that. And in all of the direct actions, we were asked to center Indigenous water protectors. They are at the center. And then, people of color and white allies can surround Indigenous water protectors and like support, but not be at the center of this. And that's really important. I also like this picture because you'll see that the youth and women are often youth also at the center, purposefully. Not in every action, but the youth, the Indigenous youth are the ones who actually like really began this whole movement, and they said like this is our future, and we need to speak up and speak out about this. And so they met in council with Indigenous elders, and the elders said like we have your back and we will support you on this. But it really came from the youth, and a lot of the actions when I was there that week were coming from the youth, and that was really inspiring to hear and see. So we haven't even arrived, at camp yet, but we wanted to get into our space of prayer and praying for the water. That's really what we were asked to do, was come to Standing Rock and pray for the water. That's the solidarity action that we were asked to do. So on our way there, we prayed for the water in this, it was like at a rest stop in Minnesota, and we were near a lake, and so mostly we just stood in silence, but I think one person from our bus shared a few words and just helped us sort of change, or maybe not change, but just center that prayer. This is a speeding bus picture of the pipeline. So it's buried, but what it looks like after it's been buried, at least in this one spot. And this is our first view of camp. So I had seen pictures, like many of you have too, but just like was really overtaken by emotions with this first view. And I think the size of it was really powerful, and just the presence of all of the different people there. So one person on our bus had been to Standing Rock before, and she also really wanted to make sure we knew her one experience can't represent everybody's, and so she didn't want to get up and talk about what it might be like for us to go, but she shared some of her stories and recommended that we arrive in silence. So for the 30 minutes before we arrived, we just didn't talk on the bus, and that was really helpful. And so it also meant when this came into view, we had been silent for 30 minutes, and yeah, I think it helped us arrive. The camp does not look like that now because there is a lot of snow, but winter. We were grateful to arrive in time to set up our camp before the sun went down. It goes down early, rises late, days are short. So we set up our camp right near the river. You'll see it in the background there. That's part of the Cannonball River that goes in between Ochedi Shakuin Camp, where I stayed, and Rosebud Camp, which is on reservation land. And you'll notice some really bright lights in the background. That is Turtle Island, which is a sacred burial ground for, I believe, 4 Lakota ancestors are buried there. And it's been like taken over by DAPL, the energy transfer company that, energy transfer partnerships that is trying to build this part of the pipeline. So those floodlights are on all the time, and there's often armed police now on the top of it, or there were when I was there. So it really changes the feel of the camp, which I'll go back to again, but the camp itself is I found to be so incredibly peaceful, and yet there's this sort of constant reminder. The camp actually filled up quite a bit, even just that 1 week that we were there. I think that the week we were there and then the following week when the veterans came is probably 2 of the most, crowded, or like the biggest population of camp that they've had. So this is when we arrived, and it almost like filled up even this view in that week that we were there. And every day that we were there were lines of cars of people arriving with supplies and people ready to stay, even for a couple days. I mean, really varied, but lots of support. I had one person at the last talk ask me what kinds of trees those were. I could not answer, but now I want to go back and find out. It's rare. There actually aren't a lot of trees there. It's mostly just like straw on the ground and like dirt ground. So it's more of this kind of view. So there are only trees around some of the edges, but this is taken from a place called Media Hill, or Facebook Hill, which is really the one place in camp where you can get service. And there are definitely lots of people who believe that it's very intentional, that it's so hard, especially like services can be so interrupted. So some people will be able to get service up in the hill, and then like their call will cut out, or they'll be online and that will cut out, and or their phone will have full battery and then shut off. There are definitely a lot of signs that communication is being like tampered with. that never happened to me. So I was able to use my phone up on this hill and get service, but it was spotty. And they were working on getting Wi-Fi for the camp, and my understanding was that they actually had the capability, but it needed approval by the elders, and it hadn't been approved. And I'm not sure what the status is now. Another thing that was really present all the time that I hadn't been expecting and didn't really ever get used to was the buzzing of planes and helicopters and drones overhead just all the time. It was constantly being surveilled. And that was really disconcerting. Some of the drones were being operated by water protectors and people at Standing Rock, but definitely not the airplanes and helicopters. And there are also lots of reports of the Standing Rock water protector drones being shot down or taken down and destroyed. So it's been a struggle to really communicate and get the word out from Standing Rock to the rest of the world about what's happening on the ground from in their own words.
I just want to say, I was one of the people, every single time I went to the Facebook Hill to use my phone, it shut off every single time. I could have a full battery, have it charged, go up there, turn it on, and it would just shut off. So I was never able to really communicate to the outside world when I was there.
Which is very disconcerting.
It's very strange, yeah.
Especially when people are worried about you and want to hear back from you.
Maeve McBride, who's the director of 350 Vermont, told me that her partner, who was out there with you, like his cell phone sent her various messages that he did not send.
Wow.
And it sounds crazy, but
it's happening. Yeah.
You'll be all right.
I know.
So you think that the people that were on the planes or whatever were trying to disrupt the communications?
Yeah, I don't know where, what the source was or where it was coming from or who it was, but that was definitely the perception on the ground of what was happening. Yeah. This is also just a good little overview of camp, although it did fill up. That big white dome is just that. It's called the Big Dome. And that's where they had their daily 9 a.m. orientations. So I think that the first real call to ask people to come stand with the water protectors at Standing Rock happened in the spring and early summer. And then, people heeded the call and more calls were made out and more people came. And people came from all over the world. I mean, not just the country, but all over the world, which was really, really amazing. And so when I was there were Maori people from New Zealand who had traveled there. And there's also a white Kiwi woman from New Zealand as well, who had left her family and come just for a few weeks because she felt like she just needed to be there. But there were both indigenous people from around the world and allies from around the world, which was really powerful. And so when I went, they recommend that everybody attend a 9 a.m. orientation when you arrive so that you can get oriented to camp and some of the basic guidelines and, values and beliefs that are really centered at the camp can be shared. And so it outgrew the dome when we were there. It was just there were just too many people to fit in the dome. So they started having to meet outside the dome and then go to these various big, you can sort of see the army green tents. We'd split up and go to those various big army green tents throughout the camp. But it was just incredible to watch us outgrow the various spaces that were there because there were so many people. And I'll just tie in one other prophecy at this point. There's an Amazonian prophecy of the eagle and the condor. And when I was there, someone at the Sacred Fire spoke about coming because of that prophecy. And so he had come from Colombia. And my understanding of it is that basically human societies, the prophecies that would split into these two paths. The eagle is the path of the mind, the industrial society, the more masculine energy, and the condor is the flight of the heart, and it's more intuitive, and it's more of the feminine side. And this prophecy originated sometime in the late 1400s, and it said for about 500 years the eagle would be really powerful. And this is like overlapping with colonial rule for 500 years of oppression, genocide, and resource extraction. And then out of that, there would arise this potential for the eagle and the condor to fly together in the same sky and create a new level of consciousness for humanity. And that for this indigenous man who spoke from Colombia, he said, that he came to Standing Rock to answer that prophecy and to help realize this opportunity for the eagle and the condor to fly together, which is really powerful to hear. That was the extent of the snow that we got, which is fairly lucky. You really can't sleep in a tent anymore there. And we were definitely warned at orientation, if you're in a tent, find a shelter that has heat. But we were lucky enough to be able to sleep in our tent and be okay. I was in a cot that raised me off the ground a little bit, which helped a lot. But now it's like you really need to have a heat source where you're sleeping. Because I heard reports of like negative 40s with the wind chill. But yeah, just speaking to from all around the world, and often people would write down where they were from and how far they traveled, and it's really moving to see those all together. Art and creativity are really central as well, and as well as spiritual prayer. So this sort of speaks a little bit to that. This is at Rosebud Camp, which is across the river on reservation land, and it's a little dream catcher. So instead of taking lots of pictures of people, I took a lot of pictures of signs. I loved all the signs though. Some of them were so artistic, and all of them were very informative. And the Big White Dome, that's what it was called. And I also love that sign, "Not prepared for cold, help stop the Florida Sable Trail pipeline." And there actually have been groups of people who've left Standing Rock, especially in light of the recent permit denial for now, to go to Florida and stand there. So there are, I think, 3 or 4 groups now that have left Standing Rock to go to new places and form a prayerful resistance encampment that's rooted in these same types of prayer and nonviolence that Standing Rock stands for. And of course, don't mix oil and water, and volunteers needed everywhere for everything. So you can't take pictures of the sacred fire, but you can take pictures of the sacred wood that will feed the sacred fire. So, and chopping wood was like an endless task. Most of it hand split. There were chainsaws for some of the bigger, really big pieces, but a lot of it was hand split and just, endless amounts of splitting to do. And the sacred fire was lit in April of this year, and it was just put out on December 10th, last weekend. And it was put out on purpose by the elders who wanted to really honor and recognize what this movement had accomplished with the denial of the permit for the Army Corps land, drilling through that land. So, so that sacred fire was put out in an extensive ritual and ceremony. Things like ceremony and ritual are such a big, important part of this, of Standing Rock. And so there was a ceremony. And then, I don't know how many minutes later, or if there was even overlap, but there is a new sacred fire. And that sacred fire was started by the youth, Indigenous Youth Council, Youth Leadership Council, which does amazing work. They also renamed the camp. So the camp that Nettie and I stayed at is called Ocheti-Shakowin Camp, which is named for the 7 councils fire. And it's named for that because the 7 councils of the Lakota and Dakota tribes hadn't met since 1876, which was the Battle of, we call it the battle, well, it is commonly referred to in like history books as the Battle of Little Bighorn, but Native people call it the Battle of Greasy Grass. And that was the last time that the 7 councils had come together. So really, really powerful stuff. And there is a circle of teepees for the 7 councils with another sacred fire that was also burning for those 7 councils to meet. And that's the basis of the name of the camp. But when the sacred fire, the central sacred fire was put out, they renamed it. Where did I write it down on my very organized notes? I want to say Ocheti Oyate, but now, yes, okay. So Ocheti Oyate, which is the People's Camp, is the new name of this camp with a sacred fire very nearby. But meaningful and symbolic that it's a different one.
I just saw something, and I don't know what's true, but that there was a clarification that said the fire was named Ocheti Oyate. So I don't know if that meant the camp is still Ocheti-Shakowin or if it's, so it's a little up in the air. I don't have the answer to that, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for, yeah. It's interesting because when you're in camp, it's sort of hard to get a full sense of what's happening because there's so much going on, and it's really hard to know what's happening outside of the camp. But then when you're outside of the camp, it's also hard to get what's happening inside the camp because communication is in pieces. But we'll have to go back and find out. More art. That is one of my regrets about my travels there is that we didn't come with like a big banner to leave there because banners were from around the world. It was really amazing. And some of the banners I think had been mailed and others had been delivered in person, but just really beautiful banners. And if I do return or if anyone else is returning, I think we should make a banner. Because it's really powerful to feel that solidarity and that unity in the art and the messaging. So Minuachoni is the sort of like rallying cry, which means water is life in Lakota. And oftentimes throughout the day, you'll just hear someone somewhere yell, Minuachoni! And then there will be a response, and people will either yell back Minuachoni or water is life, but just like, it could be anyone at any point. And these are indigenous people. I wouldn't yell this to get a response, but it's really, it was really cool to hear that because it could be from anywhere in the camps. And it's a powerful message, and it's, everywhere and repeated. And this is the black snake imagery where the pipeline is literally turning into the black snake, and that's the hashtag for the No Dakota Access Pipeline. So that's also really common. And I believe, although I'm not sure, that could be a reference to the eagle and the condor with that flight on the bottom, but I'm not sure about that. This is also the black snake. I traveled with the group on the bus, and some people were associated with the Vermont Builders Delegation, which I actually was affiliated with, and then didn't end up really building with them, but we were all tenting together and comrades throughout. But they were often, I mean, they were getting directions from different people on the ground about what needed help with building, but there was a close tie to the Red Warrior Camp, which is a small camp within Ocheti-Shakowin that is really, really focused on direct action and very youth leadership based. And so the Red Warrior Camp asked the Vermont Builders Delegation to build these shields to protect them against what was increasingly militarized police force that they were being met with. We arrived the afternoon of the big, like, explosive, violent reaction that many of you read about or heard about or saw. And so water protectors were on the front lines, unarmed, and mostly defenseless. I mean, at that point, the defenses were, and I don't even know if many people had them this night, because it was an unusually intense militarized reaction. It had happened before, but this was like tear gas, pepper spray, water cannons, sound grenades, fire hoses, like just really, really traumatizing, horrendous, injury-causing military force. And so mostly there would be maybe goggles and bandanas that you either soak in water or vinegar to try to prevent some of the damage of pepper spray or tear gas. But that's, I mean, these aren't really like defensive, weapons even. So they had asked the builders delegation to build these shields to protect them with the black snake, which is pretty powerful. And I don't know if they've been used. I do know that there was some pushback from the police, like that if water protectors were arriving at the front lines with any sort of gear like this, that it was like provoking. Probably, and it just blows my mind. The mindset of I'm still having a hard time relating to that mindset. These are some of the builders, and long hours, doing a lot of winterization work too. This is another builder, and it was sort of like anywhere you looked, there were projects going up. And the week that we were there, I mean, even structures like doubled or tripled the number while we were there, and it was both new projects and winterizing current ones, and they built a room to wash dishes for one of the kitchens, and so pretty varied, and they would just be given directions and then start their day. This is Maeve's husband, if any of you know Maeve. His name is Todd, and oftentimes you needed lights because it was getting dark, so they would build what they could in the dark, which is pretty amazing. And the cold, so like your hands and but in this project they're working on building some bridges that were used to go out to Turtle Island, which will come up later. Another job where volunteers were always needed is sorting donations, and that was one of the things I did because I brought a lot of donations and I wanted to make sure that they didn't just end up in a pile. I tried to distribute the donations that I brought to places where I knew they would be used, and then also help sort some of the donations that were being brought in. By the end, most of these were then in a new tent, so they also put up new tents because otherwise they were just being covered with tarps overnight, and snow was quickly coming. So, some of it was just like creating the infrastructure to be able to absorb all of these like generously donated items. just to prove I was there. So this is my colleague Brittany. She also works at 350. And this was actually Thanksgiving Day. So another thing I did was help out in some of the kitchens. And Thanksgiving Day is not a day of, gratitude in the same way for Indigenous people. It's like a day of mourning, more commonly. And that said, it was really, really powerful that, and I don't know who made the decisions. Elders definitely were sort of overseeing the whole camp, but then the youth had a lot of input and a lot of power coming up from the youth. And then women also were really sharing their voices and being really central to this. I'm not sure how this decision came to be, but it was decided that on Thanksgiving Day we were going to have a shared meal with as many people as we could in the camp. There was also a shared meal in the town of Fort Yates that was accompanied by Jane Fonda and other famous people. Somebody told me lots of famous chefs also went, but I don't know. So there was, did you go to that?
I went to that.
Oh, so maybe you can speak to that one and I'll speak to this one, because I went to the one in camp. Were there, what was that one like?
It was amazing. We went, Fort Yates is about 20 miles away. And so there were buses that would come to camp and take all the water protectors there and back. And they also opened up the showers. And so that was wonderful. People got to have showers. I actually drove. I went with a friend of mine who had just arrived to Standing Rock that day. And it was a huge gymnasium filled with tables. And outside, you just went in the line and people served you. Right as you were walking in the door from the outside, there was someone there to welcome you. They said, "Welcome, thank you so much for being here." And then I didn't see Jane Fonda, but apparently she was serving. And then I don't know if you guys know Shailene Woodley. She's another actress that I don't have a TV, so I don't know her, but she was there sitting a few tables away. And then people would come. There was people would come and there'd be singing and drumming that was constant throughout the camp. But there was a man who, I missed the prayer. I was there a little bit after. But the man that did the prayer, a Dakota man, he talked about the black snake, and I don't remember all the details, but part of what he was saying is that a long time ago, this evil was in the world, and what happened is they like conquered it and it went underground. And so that's why now that if you unleash it, that these evil spirits will come back out. But he spoke eloquently to it, but which I don't remember all the details. But there was it was so strange to have Thanksgiving, knowing what that holiday represents, and then to have this amazing, huge thing, like basically Thanksgiving meal with turkey and all the trimmings, with people, like sitting in tables with Indigenous people and, finding out where people are from and stuff. So it brought a lot of unity to everyone. So yeah, it was very festive.
So in addition to that meal, because messaging is sort of interesting at the camp, and you'll hear different things at different times. And so there were signs up. A lot of signs are put up on the outhouses of the porta potties, which are not being used anymore because they froze. So there are signs all over, and they were announcing that Fort Yates Thanksgiving, which was happening for a certain amount of time in the afternoon with buses. And so that's sort of what I had assumed we were all doing. But then it sort of came out that there was also going to be this meal for everyone at the camp in that big white dome that I showed before. And so this was like an amazing undertaking. And it was really just the two main kitchens. One was called either Grandma's Kitchen or California Kitchen, and the other was called the main kitchen, where we're cooking most of the, or all of the food. And so I did a bunch of chopping that day, and then I ended up somehow stumbling into the role of being one of the servers, which was such an honor. I mean, usually they would just like ask people who wanted to serve, and it was just volunteers who, if it was just any day. But on this day, more of them were indigenous youth who were serving in some cases. And I think we were all women, which I can only imagine was on purpose. But in any case, I ended up serving dessert. So I was the last person in line, and there were probably like 30 to 40 servers of different options of food. It was so amazing. You could not fit it all on one plate. So by the time they got to me, like I don't know what to do with it. And so I also had tin foil, and sometimes I would just like plop it on top, because you can't refuse Thanksgiving dessert. But it was really incredible how unifying this meal felt. And we had a prayer to start, and it was on a different day, but it feels relevant to this, where it was talking about how no matter what the United Nations say, because there were elders had visited New York to talk to the United Nations representatives, and so this indigenous man who was leading the prayer said, no matter what the United Nations says, like, we are the United Nations, like, here we are. And it was so moving. And so I ended up serving for 5 hours, and there were by the time I left, they had served 1,300 meals, and they were still serving. So people waited in line that whole time. I mean, I was serving it felt very active. I'm like doing something each time, and I get to like look people in the eye every time, and all those people, it was so incredible. But everyone else was waiting in line for 5 hours or more. It was just a really, really special night, and just it brought up for me the amount of gratitude and forgiveness that is so central to this movement. To be able to say, this is Thanksgiving, it's like a day of mourning, but here we are, and we're gonna feed you some traditional food that you eat traditional. Thanksgiving, like there was turkey, not enough for everyone, but there was a lot of it. And there were mashed potatoes, and there was squash, and there were things that you may have with your family on Thanksgiving, which is not traditional for indigenous people to eat that on Thanksgiving. So just, I was really like overwhelmed with how forgiveness is offered, and what that means, and what kind of responsibility I feel like that brings with it.
Oh.
Nettie! Nettie was also there. So another thing that people did, and Nettie did, was help at the school. So there's a school there where the children live at the camp. And so there is a school that I arrived when they were actually filming part of a movie about the school. So I got to hear a little bit about what they were saying, but it basically sounded like it's sort of an expedition-based school where all their units tie in to water is life. So whatever they're learning about, it's connected back to water is life and the struggle with this pipeline, but that it can connect to any, subject that you're talking about. And I don't remember his name, but he's an indigenous teacher who's traveled around lots of different places, and I don't know how long he was going to be there, but he teaches indigenous studies and was also visiting. And I talked to her for a little while. She is a little bit older than my daughter, so it sort of brought it home for me, because just imagining what that's like to be based at this camp with your family. And it was a choice for me to go and to leave my family at home, but it's not a choice in the same way for other people, especially indigenous people who are protecting their land. So it's different. But she was really sweet, and she was playing with those balls. And Betty also did brought some circus supplies. Is not the right word, but like
Brought a bunch of, I fundraised for the school to bring solar generators. So I brought 2 solar generators to the school, and then I teach circus as part of what I do. And so I did a circus workshop with the kids with a lot of different things, and it was great. And we left the equipment there so that they can continue.
And they also just had this really cool, like, what could just be a climbing structure. Maybe it's going to be covered at some point for a building, but it was just, it was pretty fun. The camp also, so 9 a.m. orientation, and then 2 p.m. direct action training. And you're required to go to direct action training if you want to be on the front lines at any point. And that's because there's a real purpose of the actions. And again, Indigenous people are at the center of it. And the last thing they want is like people who don't know what they're doing showing up on the front lines and messing everything up. So there's some really important like ground rules that need to be talked about. Plus, you need to know what to expect because, like I said, I arrived that day, and then the day of the militarized police response. And it's really important that people are aware that that's a possibility. So we are protectors. That's in contrast to being a protest, right? This, I know it's often referred to as the Standing Rock protest, but it's really not thought of that way at the camp. So water protectors is like the core of what this is about, and protecting the water literally. Peaceful and prayerful. Isms have no place here. We are nonviolent, respect locals. We are proud to stand, no masks, no weapons or what could be considered weapons, and all campers must get an orientation. So I went to the direct action training one day, and this was my group that we got trained with, and so basically what happened is we did like mock actions. So we had, we would have signs and chants and be at the front lines, and then other people would role play being the police or the sheriff's department and react. And I did not go to the front lines while I was there. I promised my wife I wouldn't get arrested. That's one reason, and because they said there's low risk and high risk actions at all times, so you don't have to get arrested. But when I arrived with that really intense violence, it just really threw me off, and it just like shook my I wasn't really able to shake that fear piece. And one of the things that also is really like central to the camp is prayer. And it asks, do not cultivate fear or doubt. It works against our cause. So it felt like if I was there for a longer term and I could like work through that a little bit more and release that and be grounded in the prayer, I would have loved to take part in it. But with a limited amount of time and that really intense possibility, what felt like of sheriff's department just totally losing their mind, felt like a lot for me. And when I was in this direct action, just having people pretend to be police was super scary. So I was like, I don't think I'm ready for this. Because what they would do is, and they would say these are strategies that actually happen, like, because we'd lock arms, and they talked about different strategies to be really strong as a non-violent, non-militarized or weaponized group of people. And so the people who are pretending to be the police or sheriff's department would encircle a person and basically like smuggle them away to arrest them, but just sort of like swallow them up so that you didn't even see what happened. And so even that role playing was really traumatic for, so again, just like the thought of meeting that with love and prayer and forgiveness and is really powerful. Another action that took place, and this was not the week that I was there, but this was after that night, the Morton County Sheriff's Department posted a supply list on their Facebook page. What I'm still unclear about is if that's normal. Like, I don't know if Sheriff Department often do that, or if they often do that, or if it's just like, well, hey, the water protectors are postings for supplies, so let's post for and get our friends to give us stuff. So they had a long list of supplies that they needed, including hand warmers, and they asked for energy drinks and lots of other things. And so the Indigenous Leadership Youth Council saw this posting, looked around the camp, said, we have way more than we need here. We can provide these things. And they gathered the supplies, and one of their actions was going to the Sheriff's Department and providing these supplies to people who had injured them and their family members and jailed them, and just, it is so beyond inspiring to be able to meet hate with love to that degree. And they weren't allowed in the Sheriff's Department. Probably like some PR person said, like, don't actually interact face to face here, but the youth council had a ceremony and brought these supplies and offered them, and instead of energy drinks, they brought them water. And they did a prayer, and then and they left them the supplies, and it just is like so moving that's that's the kinds of actions that are being held.
I saw a post that the Facebook for the Sheriff's Department did a thank you to them for doing it, so.
On Facebook?
On Facebook.
Right, I saw that too. I was curious if it got more personal than that, but at least a thank you. Yeah.
They accepted it.
They did accept it, yeah. They accepted it, yeah. So, and I don't know what they did with it, but I mean, hopefully if they needed it, then they used it. And there are also instances, so this is an action that happened the week that I was there. This is ABBI, and so again, Indigenous people are at the front and center of these actions, but that's not what my pictures are showing. So I just want you to know that in the back of the picture is actually the front of the front lines. So this is like the back. This is Turtle Island, what I was talking about before when we were setting up our camp. You'll see on the hill, those lights, that's from the pipeline company. And then obviously you see the Sheriff's Department and police that are coming from a number of states now. On the top of the hill. So Turtle Island, like I said, sacred burial ground. I think there are 4 Lakota ancestors buried there. And the Lakota people want Turtle Island not to be occupied by this company and this militarized presence. So there are often actions at Turtle Island asking for it to be returned. And so the bridges that I also showed will come up again in the picture. This is Avi Salaway. He's traveled on the bus with me. He's also a musician. He's really beautiful music. He brought that sign with him that he had made from home. And he's wearing the goggles that he never had to actually use, but that was part of the training, like I said. Like, these are some of the ways you could protect yourself. And so another action that happened, and I'm not sure that it was this day, is that during prayers, some of the water protectors will call out to the sheriff's departments and the police and ask them to take off their helmets and pray with them, or they'll offer water. You know, make these peace offerings and say, like, you can put down your weapons. We're here to pray. Pray with us. And they have sometimes had individual officers who have done that. And it has yet to be like the whole, you know, row, but there have been individual officers who have done that. And so, you know, change happens one at a time, maybe. You'll also notice that patch. So art is really central. They actually have an art tent, and the images and words and art is like one of the ways that people are, you know, their hearts are drawn into the movement. And so if you go to the front lines, you may receive one of these patches. That's when they're handed out. And there's more than a dozen designs. They're all really beautiful. Same core message, but different words and pictures. Here's another one. And there's also a lot of them, Dave, I thought I put this in. A lot of them, I think it's this one actually that you can't see here, yeah. So next to ABBI, it says revive the sacred. A lot of them have defend the sacred or revive the sacred on the patch. And there's the bridge that's taking people across the Cannonball River to Turtle Island, that then the island itself was encircled in like razor wire to keep the water protectors off and from climbing up. And they'd also used canoes at different points to get across, and there was, you know, records of canoes being smashed, and so just not being met peacefully. There's lots of need for legal aid because there have been hundreds and hundreds of arrests. I don't know what the number is now, but 500 is coming to mind. I'd have to look it up. So the Water Protectors Legal Collective is doing a lot of legal support. There are others as well, but and some of that is posting bail, but also providing other legal counsel. There have been groups of people being charged with felonies for things that are like not felonies. It's sort of like created felonies so that they can be charged. Luckily, this big group of people, those charges were dropped, but there's definitely lots of wrongful lawsuits happening and wrongful imprisonments and people being held without, you know, legitimate charges or not being told what the charges are. And so there's a lot of need for legal support. This is one of the ways we communicated. This is Greg Delancey. He was the poet laureate of Vermont. He's originally from Ireland. He's really great, and I brought some of his poems in that book that's in front of Nettie, which is a book, poetry book and art based around climate change, and he helped put that out. So he was on our trip. He's really wonderful, and he's on a bike that Mike Cobb brought out, and Dave knows Mike from Berkeley. Mike now is in Portland, Oregon, and he brought a cargo bike that doubles as a phone charger. And so you get on the bike, and there are mitts that you put your hands in, and you warm yourself up and bike until you want to stop and rotate out, and you can charge up to 20 phones at a time, which is pretty awesome. So that was, when I was there, that was the main way phones were getting charged, because they had a solar power setup that had had some technical difficulties. So when I was there, this is how the phones were being charged. And yeah, for me, the biggest risk of biking was that then I'd start sweating, and then you're cold. So I had to do it in short bursts because I didn't want to like actually sweat and then be freezing. But it was really fun and just super social. It was like a time when you could just, yeah, focused social time. I also didn't know if Anna might be here, but on the left is Anna. She's one of the women who wrote the article in the Commons this week in the Voices section that I really recommend if you haven't read. and then myself in the middle and another woman, Cassie, who lives in East Hampton. We were all on the bus, and we had just come from a women's meeting. So you've probably gotten the sense that there are lots of meetings happening all the time. Orientation, nonviolent direct action, women's meeting, and then every night at 6 there is a decolonization meeting, every single night. So you could literally spend your whole day going to meetings that were really informative and you learned a ton. But it was like really well organized and lots of things happening all the time. So this women's meeting was super powerful. Nettie and I were both there, and again, it was so crowded that we had to split into 2 groups. They'd never had that many women at the meeting before. And I think I naively thought, like, I'm going to go to a women's meeting and talk to other women about how to empower ourselves. But definitely I don't know what I thought. But what happened was it was led by an Indigenous woman who the goal was to empower women for sure. But one of her main messages was not if, but when this camp gets raided, we need to know how to evacuate all women and children. And we need a plan. And let's make that plan now. And, for a white woman of privilege coming into that situation, it was like super eye-opening just to think about a raid, A, and then B, women and children being targeted, which she said historically women and children are targeted. This has been 500 years. It's not a new story. It's not going to end with the Dakota Access Pipeline. So, and we need to protect each other. And we need to know where the women and children are, how many there are, what the easiest or quickest escape routes are. When the river freezes, there are ropes that go across the river so you can go from one camp to another. But just really, really intense meeting. And yeah, I think that was another moment where I really, my whole had a big shift for me. Luckily, the camp has not been raided, but yeah, just to live with that and not live in fear, just to sort of have that be present and not live in fear is a big lesson.
Can I say something else?
Yeah.
On Thanksgiving, I was up, there's one entrance, and you go through security, and there's one exit, and I was waiting for a friend coming from Maine because the camp was so big at that point, I was afraid they wouldn't find me. And all of a sudden, we heard, going through camp, women and children to the dome, women and children to the dome. And they thought the camp was going to get raided. And so they were trying to get all the women and children to the dome to then go across the river to reservation land where it would be safe. And I ended up not going, but just to kind of add to what Abby is saying, just the fact that you're living with that stress, that at any moment you might have to, your camp's going to be raided. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should take my car across because I was sleeping in my car and go, or if I should, But it turned out that nothing happened, and then we had these wonderful meals. But it did, I don't know, it did really take it to home, this overarching, I don't know if stress is the right word, but just at any moment we could be invaded.
Vigilance.
Pardon?
By vigilance, that things can happen.
Yeah, and it's, yeah, I don't know. Someone, I was telling women and children to the dome, and then somebody came up to me and said, no, it's okay, this happens once a week. So I don't know what the thing was.
Yeah, it's like a drill. I know. Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was frightening.
And it reminded me of after the election, when I was at the 350 Vermont annual meeting, there was a panel of Indigenous activists, and this one young activist from British Columbia who's in her 20s, Vanessa Gray, said that the difference in reaction from people of color and indigenous people after the election is so much in contrast to white people who are who did not vote for Trump, and that indigenous people and people of color have long feared the government and or been mistreated really, really horribly by the government and by law enforcement, so that in a different way than with white people, where many white people, not all, still think like government and law enforcement is basically there to protect you or on your side. I mean, I think that's changing, but after the Trump was elected, there were a lot of, especially liberal white people who were just like floored and just wondering how this could possibly happen. And this indigenous activist was just talking about how it was not the same reaction for her and people in her community because it wasn't a shock. This kind of like racism, this is way more overt, but that this has been here. And with especially indigenous people, like the 500 years of oppression is a long history. So that was really powerful to hear as well. So in the middle is Fidel Martine. He lives in the Albany area. He is from the Ogallala people, and he was visiting the camp many times before, and then also the week that I was there. He made a documentary, still in a rough cut, but it's showed at the Hooker Dunham, and some of you may have seen it. I definitely recommend it. It's, I think, called Standing with Standing Rock, but maybe it doesn't have a full title yet. And yeah, so he was there. It was really great to talk to him and just and to be present with him, and those are his cousins. Water is life. I wanted to say the seventh generation is another one with the youth, and I didn't mention it. Black Elk in the late 1800s, he was a Lakota leader in the late 1800s. He saw a vision of his nation suffering many generations of famine and sickness and war, and then being reunited after 7 generations and becoming part of this greater hoop of all nations on earth. And the indigenous youth now are sort of rising as the 7th generation, and there's a lot of talk of that as well, and the power of the 7th generation and this prophecy coming to be, which is really cool. This is the Cannonball River. This was actually walking back from that women's meeting from Rosebud Camp to Ocheti. This was at the end of our week. It was hard to leave. It was really hard to leave. It felt really weird to just be like, well, we arrived on a bus, we stayed, now we're going to go back on our bus. Like, good luck. It felt really weird. 5 people from our bus actually stayed, and for various amounts of time, and then 5 other people joined us. So, but yeah, it was super powerful, and it was hard to go. But there were 4 main principles that we were introduced to at our 9 a.m. orientation, like being indigenous-led, building a new legacy, which ties into the decolonization piece, be of use while you're there, and then bring it home was the 4th one, which is what I'm trying to do here. But also that, there are still people at Standing Rock now. The permit was denied, but the company that wants to drill has overlooked a lack of permits before. And Native people have been lied to again and again and again. Land has been stolen again and again and again. So some people left, and the elders did say, you can go home, especially if you're not ready for winter, and only come here if you have a connection. And, there's not the same kind of massive call, but there are still people at camp, thousands still at camp. And so there's still a lot of pressure that's needed to, at this point, defund the pipeline. And there's 17 main banks that are funding it. TD Bank is one of them. And Vermont has state pension and retirement money in TD Bank, like $193 million. So in Montpelier, there was an effort 2 weeks ago, a big action that actually shut down both of the TD banks in Montpelier. And I know Daniel mentioned that he's part of a group in Brattleboro. Every week they're outside TD Bank with signs and information about why they're out there with their signs, and how to withdraw your money if you do have it, and how to put pressure on. And there's one in Bellows Falls now as well, every week. Yeah, there too. Do you want to?
Well, not to mention that our president-elect, at least, there's been rumors that he's divested, but, he, being, from the beginning, he's had millions of dollars invested in with Kelsey Grammer, I think his name is from, but he has a huge investment in this. This is our president-elect.
Right, so this is not over.
TD Bank in Amherst was also blockaded on Friday, shut down for
yeah,
probably
I heard
half
about
the
that.
week, shut down for at least 4 hours.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. That's awesome. So basically the bring it home is like, bring this whole message home from Standing Rock, but also help us from afar, and you don't need to be at Standing Rock to do that. So what was really cool about this action in Montpelier is that Katrina Corvos is on the left. She's a Vermonter who has, she's not Lakota, but she has indigenous roots, and I'm not remembering where exactly. And then to the right is Beverly Little Thunder, who lives in Vermont, but also is Lakota. And so both of them were in Montpelier and led a water ceremony before we had our action, and brought water from the Cannonball River with them. And so we had a bowl with this water from the Cannonball River. We had a prayer. They passed a pipe around to these 4 women who had spoken, and then they led a prayer down to the Winooski River in Montpelier and offered the water to the Winooski River there, which was really, really beautiful. And just changed the whole dynamic of the action from there on. So even though we shut down the bank, it was, it felt more like we were at Standing Rock than some of the actions I've been to here, which was really nice. Luckily, we weren't met with force, and it seemed like we were almost, like the police were almost like, okay, you can shut down the bank. But I don't know if there was like an agreement, but we sang songs and just stood there and talked to a lot of people, and it felt good. They also shut down the drive-through, so that was also really cool. And I think that's officially my last slide. So, I'd love to hear from any of you if you have questions or comments. Thanks for coming. Laura, you had asked about the flooding, and so all I know about that is that it's like this question. This question of it could be good if they release the dam and flood the levels of Lake Oahe and with the Missouri, because it would create, and I don't know the physics of the drilling, but it would be too unstable to drill. Right. But it would flood these camps. So there's definitely some sort of mixed emotions going on about so is that good, and or is that the motive? So that's just what I've heard, and it hasn't happened yet.
Could you say just a little bit about the Florida pipeline you referred to?
I
Or is there
don't,
somebody else?
yeah, does that, that's a good question, because I've been meaning to look it up, and I don't know a lot about it, but I can look it up while we're here. I also was gonna play a song, as people were just mingling. There was a concert when I was there, and 4 different women musician groups from the 4 directions of the medicine wheel were invited by the youth council and performed. It was really cool, so I was gonna play a song. But I can look that up while we're,
I just wanted to add that a lot of the banks, besides those main 17, are, invested in oil and gas and fossil fuels generally, except less so when you go to the savings banks, like Brattleboro Savings and Loan. They're actually solar-powered banks. They've invested in that in their own infrastructure. So I was looking at that actually recently to switch from Citizens Bank, which I know is investing in probably, if you go online, they're one of those banks that are, many of them are larger, and that's actually an international bank of Scotland, I think. But another thing that was interesting is that a couple of weeks ago, PBS was running a special. I don't know if it was a coincidence, but the special was about how many tribes across the country have invested in fossil fuels and are selling oil and gas on their land as a way to survive, as a way to make money, as a way to, casinos is one way, but that's another way that a lot of tribes have oil and gas facilities built on their lands, which actually they're prevented from owning, but they're leasing their lands. So they don't have as much control over what happens, and that's how it's kind of playing out. But I just thought politically it was interesting how PBS was running these TV, this on their station around the time Standing Rock was in the news, and so it was giving another perspective about how a lot of tribes have had to kind of give up, sell their resources and allow these kinds of things to occur. And it's just another piece of this whole big, picture. And I really liked how you brought in the prophecies. I think it's really powerful.
There's a reason why people put their money in fossil fuel companies. Like, it's pretty profitable. But we're reaching a point in history where we know that that's really an immoral place to put our money these days, in the same way that we wouldn't put our money in, arms dealing, that kind of thing. You can make a lot of money selling arms. And fossil fuels is the same story. So 350 Brattleboro, the group that Abby and I are part of, emerging group, will be having like a kind of a defund, DAPL, and kind of divestment forum workshop in the 3rd Wednesday of January, which is the 18th. I don't know where. I can't tell you what time, but if your name and email address is on that list, or you've had an email from me or Abby before, then we'll let you know. But if that's something that you're interested in, and I think, that is one way that we can continue to, to take action, to withdraw our money, to encourage others to withdraw their money, and encourage businesses to withdraw their money, and withdraw our consent, really, from all of these, fossil fuel infrastructure projects and whatnot. So.
Want to just put a little plug for V-Bike. I don't know how many of you guys know about it, but we're kind of ramping up, what a bike can do in Vermont. It's about like getting out of the car, for people that live, somewhat locally. And it's, electric bikes, electric assist bikes, cargo bikes for carrying the kids, to really kind of, put our action where our mouth is. And next year we're going to really start doing a lot of training around how to bike during the winter, which is huge. And like in Minneapolis, I'm going to the 5th International Winter Cycling Congress in Montreal. We'll be bringing back a ton of information. So look for V-Bike as a way to really kind of, do something different.
And Dave and I are also going to be meeting, hopefully with others, and you're totally welcome to leave. Please do sign what Beth is signing, just so we have your name and email if you haven't yet. We're going to be exploring decolonization more next Thursday, the 29th at noon at the library. And it's just the first of what we hope will be more conversations, but that definitely emerged for me as like a priority after Standing Rock is just, thank you, is how we've all been colonized, and decolonization is an active process. It's not just gonna happen. And so unpacking that a little bit, what it is, what it means, what it could look like, how we do it. So Thursday the 29th at noon. And we don't have like a regular schedule yet, but that's just the first time we're gonna.
Where?
At the library.
At December 20th.
Yeah.
And Abby, I'm really sorry I wasn't able to be here earlier. What do you mean by decolonization?
That's okay. I was gonna play this on people's way out. It's basically trying to get ourselves out of the mindset of colonizers if we come from that history or being colonized. So it goes in line with like stealing, this is not our land, the history of that, and but it correlates to everything. It's like the fact that the sacred has been basically like taken out of most of our lives, and
Yeah, I think I think we've been decontextualized, from the world, and that's through our technology, through our economic institutions, through education, through so many aspects of what we just take for granted as just living as a modern human being. My son always says, "You're not a modern human being." I'm pretty modern. But really investigating how our worldview is colonized by thoughts and patterns that really are not ours. That it's part of a tradition that's not so great. Yeah.
One of the things they talked about was the decolonization of time. That
Yes.
9 to 5 was brought by the settlers. They talk about the natives and the settlers, this idea of time. And it's talking sometimes before the prayers and stuff about, you come to Standing Rock and you're free in that sort of way. And so people get really touched by that. I mean, that's why we have vacations, right? We try and get away from that burden. But so anything from that to, they also talked about the grief that we have as white people from different backgrounds, because our indigenous relationship to the earth was also severed, and that's a grief that we hold. So it's very interesting. It brings up a lot.
Yeah, and I'm from a psychology background, psychotherapist, so really look at how parts of us have been exiled away. And we have these very strong industrial-like parts that we've taken on that are part of just the institutionalizing of this very culture that we live in. And so other parts of us have been exiled to rediscover those. And that's what you probably found at Standing Rock, that experience.
I'm gonna play this song. I'll be here for some amount of time breaking down, and would love to chat if you have more. This is a group called Rising Appalachia.
We good?
We good.
All right. So we were invited here. We've been doing a lot of work for Standing Rock from the ground at all of our shows. We have a U.S. tour this year called the Resiliency Tour, and we've been navigating how and when we best wanted to show up, and wanted to show up in a way where we could really represent and not just be a tax or a burden on the camp, but really show up in a way where we could provide services and have an invitation in from the folks on the ground. So we were invited in to participate in a concert that the International Youth Council organized with 4 different women-run groups from 4 different walks of the country, 4 different sides of the circle, and representing 4 different nations. And so we were able to make that offering yesterday. Today is Thanksgiving Day, in honor of so much of the work in connecting circles and connecting the hoop. This is our song called Wider Circles.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Abby.
Thanks, Abby.